please give a warm welcome to director Matthew Rankin, who also stars in the film.
Thank you for coming, everybody. Thank you for your generosity.
Welcome to cold Santa Barbara.
It's great. It's invigorating. It's a beautiful, windy night.
Yes. Matthew, right off the bat, tell me your infatuation with beige.
It's a great question, Roger. Well, I love beige. It's a color I associate with my city, Winnipeg. My father lived in a beige apartment building, which had a very grandiose name. It was called the Lady Adele Apartments. And there are a lot of apartment buildings in Winnipeg like this that have very grandiose names, like the Lord Gort Manor, the Viscount Alexander Arms, the Lord Hartley Towers, things like this. But they're these very boring, bland, beige brick buildings, which absolutely fail to deliver the grandiosity that their names suggest. And there's something just sort of very deeply funny to me about that. So what was interesting, though, is when I went to Tehran, I was really struck that there were beige buildings exactly like that in Tehran. And similarly, my collaborators, Pirouz, Nemati, Firouzabadi, who are here tonight, they also had a similar experience in the reverse sense, in that when they came to Winnipeg for the first time when we were preparing the film, they also saw Tehran there in these beige structures. So beige became kind of like an architectural echo between the two cities, a way of kind of building a strange, kind of absurd, kind of beautiful proximity between the architecture.
And you have obviously, you have great affinity for Iranian film and Kiarostami's films. And I noticed that the outfit that you wear recalls Kiarostami's Close-Up, correct? And you wear a beige outfit like the lead actor in Kiarostami's Close-Up, correct?
That's true. Our costume designer, Negar Nemati, was very inspired by Hossein Sabzian, who is the star of Close-Up, Kiarostami's classic. And of course, in that film, he's playing a fraudulent depiction of Mohsen Makhmalbaf, the famous Iranian filmmaker. And he convinces this upper-class Tehrani family that he is Makhmalbaf, when in fact he's this sort of desperate fan. And that became sort of a tuning fork for myself. I thought that just as Sabzian did this fraudulent imitation of Makhmalbaf, I could do a fraudulent imitation of myself.
Would you elaborate on that fact that you are playing fraudulent? I mean, the whole aspect of the film, the tone of it, I find it delicious that you tapped into Kiarostami in that aspect of the film.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a movie that plays with spheres, right? We think of it as a prismatic movie, and it's trying to look at the world through a new prism, a new lens, if you will. And it is sort of it's like a Venn diagram, in sort of 70s pop psychology, you'd have these diagrams, and it'd be like 3 circles, and they would create like a new space. And we think of it like that. It's sort of taking Quebec, French-Canadian melancholy with Winnipeg surrealism and Iranian poetry, and putting them all together into a Hawaiian pizza, if I may be so bold. And the idea is to create sort of a new space out of that, and sort of a new way of looking. We don't think of it as an Iranian film or a Canadian film, but something new, some sort of a third space that is at the confluence of both.
Mm-hmm. I can play that game and be as cheeky as you can, but I admire how serious you are in the undertaking of the film. In particular, I was struck with the camera work. In Western cinema, we're used to the camera following the action and setting things up in a very proscenium way, where your camera it taps into Iranian filmmaking, where we the camera lingers in listening as opposed to what is happening. Can you tell us about?
Yeah, I love that. The camera listens. I really like that a lot. It's true. I feel like the way we film in the West is very much like how we film hockey games, you know? The camera is focused on the puck and you follow that puck. You know, it's true. And you know, when I'm talking, the camera's on me, and when you start to talk, the camera cuts to you, you know? And it's all about like the center of the action. You know, Robert McKee and the aggressive, active protagonist, right? Like that's Western cinema, right? But I mean, Canadians are notoriously passive aggressive, right? So the passive protagonist becomes sort of, you know, our thing. But in Iranian cinema, this becomes sort of part of how the filming strategy, right? Like often what I really love in these Iranian films is that what is happening next to the action is sometimes more interesting to look at than the center of the action, you know? Or in a conversation, the person listening might be more interesting to watch.
In this case, I am listening, but I'm not as interesting as you are.
But it's kind of beautiful. The idea is that, you know, we wanted to kind of create kind of a more peripheral gaze, you know, and that the camera would sort of look to the side of the action a little bit more and explore that poetic territory, which is something we don't often think about when we make a film, right? Like we film a lot of faces in cinema, and sometimes it's interesting to question, like, what happens when we don't see somebody's face, or we delay that information, you know? So we were kind of exploring that.
Tell me about this hybrid of meta-realism in Iranian cinema and the absurdity, the surrealistic trend in Canadian cinema, your idea of blending the two worlds.
Yeah, well, I do always say that Iranian cinema emerges out of 1,000 years of poetry, and Canadian cinema emerges out of 50 years of discount furniture commercials. And there is something really bizarre about putting these two together in a movie. But that's also sort of the beauty of the thing. I mean, we live in this world, and it's very complicated. Like, we're all here at the same moment. We're all alive at the same time. And that's kind of really amazing. And what that means is that we're part of a very complex ecosystem that is absurd and complicated and beautiful, and you know, it involves many things, you know, many things and its opposite. The divine and the profane, the sublime and the ridiculous all coexist. And that's sort of the space of the movie. I'm interested in that interzone.
Mm-hmm. When I introduced the film, I said that the last 20 minutes knocked my socks off. I find it so emotional. You know, in particular, the singing of that Iranian poetry by none other than the turkey wrangler. Can you tell us, how did that moment arrive? You speak about combining the banal with the sacred, and that moment illustrates what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, what we really love about that moment is that it was not in the script at all. It was something that the actor really wanted to do. We had set up the day of filming, and he was going to come in and shoot some things, and he said, I had this idea that I should sing for the turkeys. And so we were like, yes, let's do it. Let's do it. And so really the only thing we did was to change the lighting. I thought, you know, if he's singing for the turkeys, it's night, clearly. But other than that, we just sort of let him go. You know, we turned on the camera, and I said, you know, you call cut when you're done, you know, and so that's what he did, and he sang for about 10 minutes. And we were all kind of amazed. But Pirouz and Ila and I, we had not put this in the script, and we didn't really know where it would fit in the story at the end of that shooting day. But now it's a scene we can't imagine the movie without it. It's sort of one of those things that kind of just cosmically had its own ideas about the synthesis. And that's sort of the spirit in which we made the film. It was like, I'm a big believer that the fun of filmmaking is the collaboration and the joy of, making. I mean, cinema is intensely collaborative process, and that's when you build that brain, and the brain is really producing its own thoughts, and you sort of leave space for your collaborators to express themselves through the prism of the movie we're making together, then these kind of miracles sort of happen. You know, new ideas attach themselves to the original idea, and it becomes alive. You know.
In that same scene, it took my breath away that when your character walks into your mother's bedroom and there are photographs of the family, but then there's also mirrors, little frames, and we actually see you in that frame and the other characters in it. It's a breathtaking visual. Can you tell us about the genesis of that visual moment? You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, yeah. Well, that was sort of part of the shooting strategy. We really wanted, as much as possible, to find frames within frames. Because we do think of it as a prism. You're sort of, you know, there's the frame of the screen itself and then a frame within that frame. And it's about sort of looking inward past, you know, many layers. And so the mirrors kind of, you know, are part of that kind of general strategy. Even the opening shot of the film, which I do think of as kind of the thesis of the whole film, we're witnessing this action through the window of a primary school. But yeah, I really love that scene. That was the one piece of recording that we actually did in Iran. The actor who plays my mother in the film, she's our friend's grandma, and she lives in Tehran, and we recorded her voice in Tehran. So even though we're in the same room in that scene, we're actually on opposite sides of the world.
And when did you guys come about, and your writers are here, to include Farsi, and it's integral to the story, to us listening to Farsi?
Yeah. Well, that's a long story a bit.
We're here all night.
Yeah.
It's cold and wintry out there. We'll just sit here and listen to you.
Sure. So, I mean, it emerged out of the material itself. It began with a family story, in fact. My grandmother, who grew up in Winnipeg, she was telling me the story about her life during the Depression, and she and her brother found a $2 bill frozen in the ice on the street in Winnipeg, and they went on this sort of citywide odyssey to get it out, and they were sort of defrauded by this drifter. And I mean, the story in the film is very similar to the story my grandmother told me, and that it was just sort of something that kind of captured my imagination when I was a kid. And later, I discovered these Iranian films produced by the Qanun Institute, the Institute for the Intellectual Development of Children and Young People. And it had produced all these really amazing films for children in Iran. All the early Kiarostami films, Sohrab Shahid Saleh, Jafar Panahi. And they're always films about children facing adult dilemmas and having to navigate a strange adult world. And there was something of an echo of my grandmother's story in these films. There was even The White Balloon by Jafar Panahi has a sort of its drama is constructed over the problem of, you know, lost money. And so I thought this would be like, you know, this story of my grandma is kind of like almost a Qanun style film plot. And there was something touching to me about how my grandmother, who was at that time an octogenarian, and had always lived in Winnipeg, how her story as a child would find some resonance in these Iranian films on the other side of the world. So the original idea was to tell her story through the cinematic language of these Qanun-style films. And then later, as I started to work with Pirouz and then Ila, we became really excited about just sort of expanding that paradigm on a very great level and really making it in Farsi. And that was something that really appealed to me just as an idealistic person. I feel like we make a lot of films in English, and it was really exciting to sort of make something in Farsi in Winnipeg. That's such an improbable and delightful idea to all of us. So we went about doing that, and it was amazing.
Were you conscious, and I'm going to assume that you are, because with all your lightheartedness, I know you're a deep thinking person. There's so many layers to your film. You deal with space and time. You deal with the interconnections that we're all in this together, and we're actually connected to one another. You also deal with the banal and the divine. When I watch your film, there were so many deep layers that resonated in me. Is that something that you were conscious of, if that's what you wanted to tap into?
Yeah, well, you know, you're after an idea, I guess, when you make a movie. I think that when I mean, we sort of worked on this together, the most intense part of this production. I mean, Pirouz and I have been talking about this movie for over a decade. It's sort of emerged out of a long conversation, but its most intense creative period was during the pandemic. And, you know, that was a time of very, very intense solitude. And I sort of feel, my own feeling about it is that we haven't really recovered from that solitude. And that solitude is sort of becoming, it's sort of metastasized into something really pathological. And we now live in a time that's very, very rigid, you know, and all of these Berlin walls are shooting up all around us in politics and on Instagram and in our economies. And
Although you're going to be annexed to the United States very soon.
That's right. Well, yes, Canada will be available at a bargain, you know. Yeah.
The 52nd state.
That's right.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, but that's it. It's sort of, you know, it's one of those things, you know. So I feel like in a way that was something that is preoccupying for us in making this film, and you know, we wanted to create a space. I mean, it's a film that's sort of playing, you know, it's sort of trying to connect different points on the compass. The idea, you know, there's great solitude in the movie, but great community as well. There's great distance, but also great proximity. It's very cold, but it's also a very warm film, you know? And, you know, that's what we wanted to create, was this sort of very, you know, despite the binaries that we've set up and the very rigid walls that we are now building, I feel like our experience of life as people is infinitely more fluid than that, you know, when we are part of a complex ecosystem. And despite these walls, we as humans have to flow between them like a river.
But I think that what is really warm about your film is that they're deeply personal moments that come from autobiography. I mean, you talked about your grandmother's dollar bill. I laughed out loud at the Groucho Marx moment, which I immediately sort of understood that must have come from deep within your psyche.
Yeah, well, that kid is me at age 8. I was obsessed with Groucho. Really, I was obsessed with Groucho, and for some weird reason, my mother, who was a relatively reserved person, nonetheless allowed me to like paint a mustache and eyebrows on my face every morning with her eyebrow pencil. And I would go to school like that. And, you know, my teachers very swiftly hired a team of child psychologists to beat this out of me, and I did spend most of grade 3 in a supply closet dressed as Groucho. So there's little memories sprinkled throughout.
Mm-hmm. How does your mother feel about watching this film and the Groucho in the closet?
Yeah, well, you know, I do have some photos of that era. She even let me have carry around a mustache, like a cigar, like an actual cigar. The kid in the movie, he's smoking like a licorice cigar, which he found to be utterly disgusting. But for some weird reason, my parents let me have a cigar and walk around with it.
And that wasn't utterly disgusting, but the licorice cigar is utterly disgusting. Tell me about the turkeys. How difficult, serious question here, how difficult was it to direct these turkeys?
Well, we had like the Sir John Gielgud of turkeys. Really, he was an absolute pro, though we did have one incident with him. The first day with the turkeys was actually the last image of the film where they waddle across the screen. And I wanted them to do that, but I thought, you know, they're turkeys, so who knows what they're gonna do. So we set aside like a whole afternoon to film that shot, but the turkeys nailed it on take 1. Really, they did. And then the director of photography, Isabel Stechenko, was like, well, you know, if we waited a half hour, we could have nicer light. So we thought, okay, we'll wait a half an hour, and then we did that, and then take 2, turkeys nailed it again. Like, perfect. So I was just, you know, this led me into a false sense of security that these turkeys could just do anything. And a few days later, we were shooting in a snow dump. There's this massive dump outside of Montreal where they collect all the snow in the winter and they dump it there. And it's huge. It's very steep. It's about 300 feet tall and, I don't know, like a mile around. It's gigantic. And we were filming there and did take one with the turkey. Turkey was pretty good, but I believed he could do better. So we tried take two with the turkey, and midway through the take, he bolted, and we just sort of all watched in disbelief as he scuttled up this 300-foot cliff of snow where none of us could reach him, and he just sort of looked down at us, and that was the end of the night. And the next morning, he was arrested by the Montreal Police Department. But that same turkey came back to deliver what I think you'll all agree was a very soulful performance.
Is he the turkey in the bus?
Yes, that's that same turkey.
And speaking of turkey acting, no, I'm joking. You casting yourself and acting in the film, how was that experience for you?
Yeah, it was good. It's nice to do that because it forced me to have a lighter touch. I couldn't be everywhere, and it was strange. But it was really great. Pirouz and I kind of collaborated on that. Often when you don't see me in the frame, it's Pirouz dressed as me, and I would usually do the blocking with Pirouz, and then we'd switch positions when I had to be on screen. But I'm a very needy actor, I learned. I really need to be mothered badly. I don't need that as a director. I don't really need a lot of, external validation or whatever. But as an actor, I really need to be held, and thankfully Pirouz, he does that. The hug scene in the movie was inspired directly by my friend Pirouz, because he'll really hold you like that, like really long, deep hugs, like 5 minutes sometimes. He'll just hold you, and it becomes funny after a certain moment, and then it becomes great. So there were a lot of good hugs on set, so that kept me going.
Tell us about the reception in Canada on the film. I mean, it got submitted for the Oscars and it's shortlisted.
Canada's official supplication. Yeah. Yeah, it's really nice, the joke in Canada, of course, is that, if you make some art and it goes out into the world and the world likes it, the Canadians will be happy for you. But if you make some art and it goes out into the world and everyone hates it and your life is destroyed, then the Canadians are really happy, But it's gone over really great so far. Really, we haven't shown it in Winnipeg yet.
You have movie theaters in Winnipeg?
Yeah.
Is it like an igloo?
Yeah, I don't live in Winnipeg anymore, but I often have to return to renew my neurotic affiliations. And reconnect with the source of my discontent. But we're going to be showing it at the end of the month, so we will soon face the wrath of Winnipeggers. But honestly, I think they're going to love it. I really do.
Mm-hmm. I read an interview where you mentioned that this film is an autobiographical hallucination. Would you care to expand on that term?
Well, I mean, again, it's the idea that the movie is sort of fed through a prism. It is drawn very much from my own life. It's the story of my grandmother is one plot. The story of Massoud, who's played by Pirouz, is kind of based on my father. My father was a lifelong enthusiast of Winnipeg and all of its banalities, and would take you around and show you all manner of boring space as if it was like Mount Rushmore or something. And then, of course, the third story is my own. I did work for the government for 1 year after my first feature. I was really in debt. I was like badly in debt, and I had to work for the government for a year to get myself out of the hole. And my last day at the government was exactly like in the bureaucrat scene in the movie. So it's a reprocessing, but I didn't tell this story alone. That's the idea. I told it with a community. I told it through a prism, and it's an alternative approach to the autobiographical form.
Mm-hmm. Well, before I let you go, I gotta tell the audience that we're gonna do a theatrical run of the film shortly. So please spread the word about the film. And there are Academy members in the audience. Please vote for this film to get it through to the nomination. And thank you so much. You're a delight.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your generosity.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.